Hear me? Moses, can you unmute yourself? Let me know if you can hear me, or if anyone can confirm.
Hi, Olivia. We can get you. You can go ahead.
Great, thanks a lot. Good morning, very good morning, everyone. So I am Olivier de Valois. I am the founder of a consulting firm called Hammercock Climate Impacts, which I've set up about 4 years ago. I've been working on the carbon market and carbon finance for nearly 15 years now, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, supporting project developer to access carbon finance, initially on the compliance carbon market in Europe under the emission trading schemes, and over the past decade, supporting project developers in relation to energy access and natural ecosystems in sub-Saharan Africa to get access to carbon finance. So I've been involved into all the major segments of the carbon market, from project formulation, identification, supports to feasibility studies and certification, as well as trading the resulting carbon assets. And I will be presenting today the webinar on carbon finance and the key challenges across the Zambian landscape.
Thank you very much, Olivia, once more for that introduction. So this webinar has been organized by Prospero in collaboration with Hammercock Climate Change and Finance company. So the main aim is simply just to raise awareness on climate finance, and also just to interact on how we can assist different organizations as well as SMEs when it comes to carbon programming here in Zambia. So all of the participants are encouraged to freely interact as well as ask questions when the opportunity is accorded. So at the end of this webinar, there will be a short survey which will pop up. So please do not forget to complete that survey. It will help us very much as we move forward. So once again, you are all welcome, and feel free to interact. Thank you very much. So at this point, let me invite Olivia to proceed with the first session of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Moses. And do let me know if at some point you can't hear me clearly. So as mentioned by Moses, the webinar will be divided into 2 sections. The first one more focused on general context and backgrounds around carbon finance, and this will be a slightly longer session, and then we'll have a shorter session of maybe about half an hour on sort of elements and challenges that are more specific to the Zambian landscape. But in the first part, we'd also be talking about the current setup, institutional setup and context in Zambia. And so happy to I'll be taking questions at the end of each part. So a bit of context, and I've come to realize that the level of knowledge varies greatly from one person to another, from one organization to another, from one country as well to another. And so I'll be explaining some of the basics of carbon finance, and hoping that this won't go too slow for some of you who may already be familiar with the concept. When talking about carbon finance, we are usually dealing with 2 main financial mechanisms. The first one called carbon cap and trade. The other one is called baseline and credits. Those are 2 different types of mechanisms, but they are often implemented either separately or in combination, sometimes overlapping. The cap and trade system is often referred to as emission trading schemes, a market where participants are exchanging permits or allowances. Those allowances are usually materialized by an institution. Some of the biggest markets that of this sort that exist today are the European Union emission trading schemes, But there's also the Californian cap and trade. China has also implemented regional carbon markets, and a number of countries in the north that have this system in place. And usually participants are companies that are carbon intensive industries, like power generations, steel and metal, ceramic, glass making, all those industries that are EV consumer of energy, and most of the time EV consumer of carbon intensive energy. Those companies are being given, or sometimes auctioned, permits or allowances. Those are the same things. One permit corresponds to the right to emit 1 ton of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It's a purely fictive, permit, dematerialized, and does not necessarily correspond, or does not correspond to any specific activities reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Really is permits to emit a ton of carbon dioxide. That's what we call emission trading. On the other side, and this is I think going to be the main focus of today's presentations, there we have the baselining credits mechanism, also called offsetting mechanism. Those carbon credits that are issued from those offsetting mechanisms, they correspond to emission reductions that are being materialized by an independent, often non-for-profit organizations, such as the United Nations, in the context of the Kyoto Protocol, and soon in the context of the Paris Agreement. But we also have independent organizations such as the gold standard or the verified carbon standards, another about 20 to 30 of these organizations that sets rules for project activities to be granted carbon credits or carbon allowances. So each ton, each permit, each unit, I should say, corresponds to a ton of carbon dioxide that has already been either reduced, avoided, or removed from the atmosphere through a specific and dedicated project activities. Those carbon units, they have different names, but this is really several names for the same things. They're often called carbon credits or carbon offsets, sometimes also voluntary or verified carbon units. So on one hand, we have the permits, and there's always a lot of confusion. On the other hand, we have carbon reduction units. We're going to be focusing on carbon reduction units because this is the financial mechanism that could support project activities pretty much everywhere in the world, as long as those project activities reduce, avoid, or remove carbon from the atmosphere. So this is getting a little bit more into the actual baseline and credits or offsetting mechanism. The baseline is established, and the baseline is basically the quantity of greenhouse gas emissions that would be taking place, happen, or be emitted into the atmosphere without a specific project or specific activity being implemented. So, for instance, here you see the black and then blue line corresponding, for instance, let's say greenhouse gas emissions coming from the power sector when generating electricity under a business as usual scenario. Now, what you see as the green line is the level of greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions that would be emitted if a specific project is implemented. So here it could be, for instance, large-scale solar power plants or wind turbines or hydropower or any sort of renewable energy, for instance, that would enable the power sector or more molecular or to a more localized area, I guess, to a mini grid, or enable to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in comparison to what would have taken place without this project, this activity is being implemented. And what you see as the yellow surface is basically the calculated or estimated emission reductions that the project activities have enabled. And this emission reduction could potentially be materialized in forms of carbon reduction units. Obviously, there are a number of conditions that product activities have to meet to be able to, generate, sell, and carbon credits. But we will get into that in the coming slides. So the emission reduction really is the difference between the baseline, which is the situations without the project, and the situation after the project implemented. So any type of activity, and I'll go into that to give you a bit more clarity and concrete cases of the type of activities that we're talking about here. I've used renewable energy as an example because it's maybe more easily understandable by a broader range of people, but I'll get into sort of a more granular level of project activities that could be triggering emission reduction and benefiting from carbon finance. Those we're talking about, so even with that sort of functional mechanism, we're talking about two different markets. If you have like one product and you could potentially be selling it locally, domestically, or internationally here, and you'd be talking about two different markets because they have very different market dynamics. And here, this is the same thing, really. Those carbon reduction units, they could be potentially sold on the compliance market or on the voluntary carbon market. The compliance market is basically the market that is regulated by international treaties such as the Kyoto Protocol and now the Paris agreements that set the rules for project developers and activities to be granted with emission reduction units. The voluntary carbon markets is a market where things are less regulated. So on one hand, we have an independent organization delivering carbon credits according to their own set of rules. And on the other hand, we have companies that support project reducing greenhouse gas emissions by buying carbon credits from them. Those companies, they usually do not have or do not have any obligation to buy those carbon credits to support those projects, but they do it for a range of motivations, which I'll talk about. So those are, I think a bit complex, this table, but just examples of these two financial mechanisms, which you have on the left-hand side of the table, being applied to a range of contexts and situations in as part of a compliance, regulated, or a voluntary market. So we see a range of situations, mostly in country in the north, as well as New Zealand, and Australia, and Japan. And those are really just a few examples, and we are seeing emerging, notably, in Sub-Saharan Africa, mechanisms that are using baseline and credits in the compliance market, like in South Africa. The dynamics of the markets are different on a regulated market and on a voluntary market. On a regulated markets, as I've mentioned earlier, these are often industrial companies that are regulated, and they have to comply with the law. They have to surrender carbon units as per the regulatory requirements. So their main focus is going to be on minimizing the cost of complying with the law. When buying carbon credits from product activities that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, notably in Sub-Saharan Africa, companies are going to be focusing on the cost. They will try to acquire the cheapest emission reductions that are out there. On the other hand, and this is what is going to be the main focus of the presentation today, so the combinations of this carbon offsetting mechanism together with the voluntary market. So on the voluntary markets, as I mentioned, those are companies like Google, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Orange, or really, I think, a very broad range of organizations that have, you know, sometimes even just domestic, but very often international operations, and that are willing to balance out their own greenhouse gas emissions, the greenhouse gas emission of their own operations by supporting projects that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that are certified as carbon project, and that can deliver those carbon credits. And those organizations, they are motivated by a range of things, including the welfare that the project generates beyond the emission reduction, the social, economic, and potentially biodiversity impact of the activities undertaken. Obviously, there will always be you know, consideration for the cost, because this needs to be aligned with the budget that this organization have, you know, to balance out their own emissions. Often there's also considerations around the organizational fit. You know, for instance, an organization that operates, a mining organization that operates out of Zambia, they may be very keen to support a project in Zambia, and maybe specifically in either the forestry or the land use or the mining sector, because of this sort of organizational fit between the project and activity they support and their own activity. Product location, I've mentioned, you know, specific partner, maybe one of their suppliers, someone active on the supply chain, implementing a project or activities that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then they would consider this as an important factor to support them over, you know, another project. The voluntary market here, which we're focusing, it's a global market. It's kind of fragmented, but it's global markets in the sense that it's not regulated, and any corporates or individuals with social responsibility considerations can participate. There's no barrier to participation. Anyone can today look at their own, let's say, climate change impacts, you know, through traveling, for instance, and decides to balance out their own carbon footprint. In that case, they could do it through supporting a project on the voluntary carbon markets, or a project that reduces greenhouse gas emissions in, for instance, Zambia. The voluntary carbon market is today not directly linked to countries' emission reduction objectives. They often are aligned or reinforcing them, but there is no alignments that is required, or that is often you know, searched to when implementing these activities. Those carbon credits and carbon offsetting mechanism, they can be used in combination with other mechanisms, such as a carbon tax, and that's the case in South Africa, where the power sector have to surrender carbon permits at the end of each year at the level of their own greenhouse gas emissions. And for a small percentage of their requirements, 5 to 10%, they can decide to surrender carbon emission reduction units as opposed to carbon permits. And in that case, they would need to find projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions from which they would be off-taking those carbon credits. This is a market that is, well, maybe because it is not regulated, is growing increasingly sophisticated. We are seeing a lot of different initiatives in different parts of the world, but also this is a source of, you know, innovation, because again, they're not driven by as much maybe bureaucracy than maybe UN or United Nations led, for instance, you know, a mechanism. And so we have seen a range of organizations, some of them mentioned in the bottom of the slides here, including Vera, the Gulf, that are coming up with greenhouse gas quantification methodologies for a range of sectors, including energy access, including forest protection, reforestation, agriculture, energy efficiency, and that has enabled a number of activities and ventures to be benefiting from this financial mechanism. Here's a list of some of the most widely used and known carbon certification standard. The carbon certification standard is one of these independent organizations that set the rules for activities to benefit from carbon finance and generate and be able to, or allowed to sell carbon credits. So Plan Vivo, Climate Action Reserve in the US, mostly gold standard, very focused in sub-Saharan Africa and development contexts. American Carbon Registry, quite focused in North America. Vera, very focused on, we're very international, very focused on forestry and renewable energy. So this is to give you an idea of who might be providing funding to project activities reducing greenhouse gas emissions, including in developing countries. We are seeing that most of organizations that are participating in that market are private sector companies, most often multinational companies. They often have a stake through their supply chain in sort of a number of countries, and are keen to support them through that mechanism. We are seeing domestic companies that only have operations in a single country, that are also balancing out their emissions either through domestic project or international or project or activities. Throughout this presentation, I'll be talking about project, but I really mean any activity that really has the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Project is kind of we use a lot this vocabulary in this context, simply because we are often talking about fairly large scale program that reduce greenhouse gas emissions that can sort of benefit from carbon finance. And so often called project or program, but it would probably be fair to be calling it activities or set of activities. We're seeing to a smaller extent public sector and governments to sort of use this market. 2 years ago, where I worked on the European Parliament, offsetting their own carbon emissions for a number of years. So that's what would fall into that box. And we see as well a small number of NGOs and non-for-profit associations supporting product activities by buying carbon reduction units on the voluntary carbon markets. The price that let's say a project developer or product owner or activity owners might get usually depend on the nature of the activity. Here you're seeing 6 large sectoral categories under which a number of activities could be implemented. And as you see here, the price that buyers of carbon reduction units are willing to pay on this market can differ quite substantially from one type of project, you see renewable energy, to another one, agriculture. This there's a range of explanation for that, but it's also happy to maybe go deeper into that if there are questions at the end of the sessions. But that represents global transactions. So this often can be disaggregated, and you will see differences for activities depending on their size, depending on their location, depending on the technology. But as the market matures, we are seeing increasingly standardized price for broad categories of project, and prices have tended to increase since that data sets that is shown in this on this slide. But forestry and agriculture often trigger a higher price because they're perceived as triggering more economic, social, and environmental benefits. They're also known for sometimes being quite expensive to implement. It may be more costly to implement or to reduce a ton of carbon dioxide through agricultural and forestry activities than it may be through other type of activities such as waste management or disposal, or household and community devices here, meaning improve cooking stove and maybe water filtration devices that works without energy. And that renewable energy really includes all sort of renewable energy that you might think of: solar, wind, hydro power, as well as landfill gas, sometimes use of landfill gas. The voluntary carbon market has been out there for 10 to 15 years now, but suddenly there is an increase of interest in this market for a number of reasons, some of which are mentioned here. We have seen an increasing number of corporates, large multinational corporates, committing into reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, the greenhouse gas emission of their operations over the next 10, 20, or 30 years, and to balance out the residual emissions, those emissions that they won't be able to reduce or avoid, by supporting projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But obviously, after the Paris agreements, and we have seen an increased awareness around climate change, but also because of a number of natural disasters that have taken place over the past few years, and record temperatures, and so we are seeing a societal change, at least in a number of countries. That's the case in Western Europe, that's the case in the US to some extent, that's the case in Australia to some extent, and those are countries where consumers may have an impact on corporates through the products and services they consume. And so that sort of increased awareness around climate change sort of triggers corporates to try to act to tackle climate change. There's a number of predictions that are being made about what this means for the voluntary carbon market and for activities that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including in developing countries. And the diagram, or the figure on the left hand side, sort of gives you one of the scenario that is out there, and which shows basically the potential scale up of carbon finance and emission reduction over the next 10 years. The green line, the green surface, represents those emission reductions that are related to natural ecosystems, including protecting forests, recreating forests. It could be also agroforestry. It could be conservation of carbon in soil through changing agricultural practices, and activities related to coastal ecosystems, such as the protection or creation of mangrove ecosystems. This is a financial mechanism that is focused on carbon emission, greenhouse gas emissions, but that also promotes and supports activities that have, I would say, co-benefits. Some people would consider that those are the main benefits, is really not the carbon, but all the rest. And so we are seeing those carbon certification standards, those organizations that are delivering carbon credits, and that also require project activities to track their impact on sustainable development goals, a number of sustainable development goals, and demonstrate the social, economic, and environmental impact of their activity. That's the case of the gold standard. That's the case of the Sustainable Development Vista standards. That's the case of the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Alliance, which is a certification standard that land use related project would apply to demonstrate that their activities has a positive impact on climate change adaptations, on social impact, positive social impact on communities, and on biodiversity. So even though we're focusing on carbon here, those are often enabling activities that also have a positive impact on climate change resilience and adaptations of communities and ecosystems. Carbon market, or this carbon market, can also be seen as a way to bridge the biodiversity financing gap, which has been highlighted and is not necessarily talked as much talked about as much as climate change, but you know, biodiversity and climate change can really have a lot in common when tackling common issues and activities. And you know, beyond the fact that those there's a possibility for functional sponsors to support activities that have all these other benefits. Those carbon units are often sold at a higher price on the market if they're able to demonstrate that they generate these benefits. And we have seen recently that project that had, or product activities that had this, you know, as the Vista label, were able to trade at a 10% premium compared to other carbon units. Moses, I don't have my eyes on the watch, huh? So don't hesitate to let me know if I have to speed up a bit at some point. So here's a glance at the specific context of Zambia. In Zambia, we have approximately, last we looked, 16 project activities. So it's really not a large number when considering the size of the country. 16 project activities that have been certified to the certification standards, which I have mentioned earlier. Most of them, 3/4 of them, have certified their activities and greenhouse gas emissions to the verified carbon standard, also known, or it's a standard under the umbrella of the organization called Vera, which I've mentioned earlier. And then the rest was certified to the Clean Development Mechanism, which is the certification standard administered by the United Nations, notably under the Kyoto Protocol, and that is being sort of transitioned into the Paris agreements. In terms of sector, most of those emission reduction activities are taking place in the agricultural and forestry sector. Some of them are related to improve distribution of improved cooking stoves, and some others in relation to renewable energy, I think notably the generation of hydropower. We have seen it's not necessarily a complete picture and things tend to move, but we've seen Zambian players trading their carbon asset at between $3 and $12, considering today's prices. Some of them are trading them in the range of 10 to 20 US dollars per per emission reduction units or carbon credits. This is another way to look at the current situation in Zambia, and this diagram shows the number of carbon credits that have actually been issued in Zambia. The diagram stopped in 2019, but now we should have the record for 2020, 2021, and we should probably see an upward trend. But obviously, as you can see, the volume of carbon credits issued since 2016 at least is much larger than what was previously issued. So there's definitely positive dynamic, mostly due to large-scale energy access programs. I mentioned the improved cooking stove, as well as large-scale forest protection programs. Here's an example of one project that has recently issued carbon credit and that finances most, if not all, their activities based on the sale of carbon credits. This is a program implemented by an organization that some of you might know called Comaco. They started their activities in 2012, covering 5 districts of Zambia and generating, well, implementing activities that have been reducing, avoiding greenhouse gas emissions to the level of about 120,000 tons of carbon dioxide every year. So you multiply that by, the price that I gave you earlier, maybe $10, and that gives you an idea of maybe the budgets that this organization may have had. Again, I don't know the specifics and the benefit sharing arrangements, but that gives you an idea of their potential annual budget for implementing activities related to sustainable increase of smallholder farm crop yields, which reduce agricultural expansions into forest areas, for instance, and reduced uncontrolled forest loss and degradations, notably by reducing, for instance, the production of illegal charcoal. In this program, there are 2 large-scale components. One of them is about sustainable land management, as I've mentioned, mostly focused on yield increase and sort of intensification of agriculture, and the other one broader, covering about 150,000 hectares of existing forest under threats of either degradation or simply deforestation. And this organization works with over 100,000 smallholder farmers and providing with market incentive and better access to the bulk of the value chain, the chain value, I guess. Here's another program that has been implemented in Zambia, started in 2011. It's a program that enabled the distribution of about 15,000 improved cooking stoves. So most households, notably in rural Zambia, cook with the devices that you see on the picture, 3 stones, which is known to be very inefficient in terms of energy. About 90% of the energy actually don't really eat the pots and goes out into the atmosphere. And by enabling access to better technology for cooking, more of this energy is actually going into the pot and reducing, as a consequence, the consumption of firewood or sometimes charcoal, reducing pressure on forests and avoiding carbon to be stored in trees to be released back into the atmosphere. So this one, we don't have a picture of the technology distributed here, but this technology distributed reduced the use of the firewood by 66%. It's distributed free of charge to household, who in exchange give up or transfer their emission reduction rights, something that is not very much used for them, to the project developer, who will then sell those emission reduction rights onto the international voluntary carbon markets and use the proceeds of the sale of these credits to repay for the stove they've given away to this household. There are many ways of activities can be structured, but that's one way that we see a branch of project and activities and location. And and obviously the project has got plenty of other benefits, reduce indoor air pollution, reduce the time that it takes for often women to collect firewood, free up the time that they can use for other activities. And it's a very popular type of product activity on the voluntary carbon markets. In sort of zooming out a bit of the specifics that I have shown here, and let me just, I think I realized that I may not have the latest presentation here, which I've invented. Here, okay, yeah, I'll just take that here instead. Hold on a second, please. Okay. I'll just reshare my presentation again.
Hi, Olivia.
Yes.
So in terms of time, we're running out of time for the first session. So if you could just increase the speed, thank you.
How much time? How much time are you saying?
For the first session, I think we still have roughly 10 minutes remaining. So if you could just increase the speed so that we could also give chance to the participants to ask questions. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, and again, that first part will last a bit longer, but that's understood. I'm just going to be sharing my screen unless you can see. Yeah, here we go. Okay, can you see my screen? The presentation.
Yeah, it's visible. It's visible, Olivia.
Okay, cool. All right, so Zambia, Zambia, like every other countries who was part of the Paris Agreement, had to put together what is called the nationally determined contributions, and how the government and the country of Zambia will be contributing to the Paris Agreements in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as building the resilience to climate change, through adaptations. And so the countries has made their carbon footprints and have found the most greenhouse gas emissions in Zambia are coming from the land use change and forestry sector, mostly related to deforestation, mostly due to expansion of agriculture, mostly related to the use of biomass for energy consumptions. And the country is basically pledged to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by about 20 million ton of carbon dioxide by 2030. But it will also say that if we do have access to international climate finance, including carbon finance, we are willing to try to reach emission reduction of 38,000 million ton of carbon dioxide. And those, this carbon finance tool is one of the tools that could be used for to support the country and its strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a range of sectors. Obviously, those sectors with the largest footprints are those where the greatest potential to reduce greenhouse gas emission is in Zambia, and for the use of carbon finance and the mechanism that I have been talking about. So mostly land use change and forestry, agricultural waste, and to a much smaller extent, electricity production. The country has already got, in place a range of legislation to support this vision and strategy, a long-term vision to 2030, which includes a range of aspects that are, supportive of actions towards, tackling climate change. The 8th National Development Plan also, as environmental sustainability as one of the core pillar, and the country has got a national climate change response strategy, which includes all those sectors that I have mentioned, and which mention, that carbon finance could play a role in financing some of those activities that has the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have also in Zambia a community forest management act that is reinforcing the possibility for community forest groups to get together and implement activities that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in exchange of having the rights to trade the resulting carbon reduction. So that very new piece of legislation that came up in last year, called Forest Carbon Stock Management Regulation in Zambia, is one of the core regulation to build the institutional framework in Zambia, and that's list a number of activities that are in Zambia going to be allowed to benefit from emission reduction rights. Those are, activities that enables to reduce deforestation, to reduce forest degradation, to enable forest conservation, to enable sustainable management of forests, and to enhance carbon stocks in existing forests. So this one is very specific and focused on forests, because this is one of the most complex sector to manage when it comes to carbon trading. But that's really, I think, a positive signal. That's the institutional framework in Zambia is building up to enable a range of players on the market, to on the economy, to use this wonderful mechanism. And maybe just want to mention here something that is called RED Plus strategy. RED is an acronym that stands for reducing emission from deforestation or forest degradation. It's really just a mechanism of getting, avoiding deforestation and forest degradation by implementing activities that are going to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that are going to be funded by the sale of carbon reduction units. And Zambia is notably in the top 10 of the countries with the highest rates of deforestation globally. And so this is a pretty significant issue. And all these sectors here, forestry, agriculture, energy, mining, land use, have an impact on deforestation and forest degradation today. So anyone working in one of these fields is potentially have the potential to implement activities that will have a positive impact on these ecosystems. So that's another project example. I'm not going to mention that. Yeah, so those are the sectors that are broad sectors that are eligible to be using carbon finance. I already mentioned some of them, so I'm not going to go through them, but you can see on the figure on the right-hand side that there really is a very broad range of activities that could benefit from carbon finance, from soil carbon conservations to biogas, use of biogas, or the reduction of refrigerant gases, or energy efficiency measures, or waste incineration. Really, as long as an activity is able to demonstrate it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it can in theory deliver carbon credits and get funding for these carbon credits. However, for an activity to be able to sell carbon credits, it needs to be recognized. It needs to be recognized by the certification standard as meeting the carbon certification standard. Really, it's like an organic products or a fair trade. It really needs to meet a number of set of specifications to be able to use the label and get the premium that is associated with the label. So here it's very similar. It's not because your project activities or your activities reduce greenhouse gas emissions that it will be able to generate or sell carbon credits. And so projects need to be certified, and this is a process to get your activities certified. It starts with number 2 is basically drafting. And it's like a concept note, a document that explains how your activities are going to be implemented and how they're going to be enabling emission reductions. Step 4 is about having this documentation audited by an independent and certified auditors. We'll look at your documentations and confirm that your project and your documentation is in line with the rules of the certification standard. Once this is done, your project documentation and your audit reports go to the certification standard in step 5, and the project is officially recognized by the certification standard which I've mentioned before, the gold standard or the BCS. And once the project is officially recognized as a carbon project, and the end of step 5, step 6 and 7, the project monitor its activities to be able to demonstrate it has been reducing greenhouse gas emissions, draft a short report about the impact of the activities, and get this audited again in step 7. And the auditing report is here to confirm that what you are saying in your monitoring report is accurate. And once this is done, the verification report gets sent to certification standard in number 8, and the carbon credits are materialized for each ton of carbon dioxide that you have been able to demonstrate you have reduced through your the implementation of your activities. Here you go. I think how Moses, I think I've sped up a little bit at the end, but if there are specific questions, I'm happy to obviously take them and spend a bit more time on specific aspects.
Thank you very much, Olivia, for that detailed presentation. So at this moment in time, we'd like to take up questions from the audience. So we'll start with reading out the initial questions that were typed. The initial questions that were typed in the chat. So the first one, I think, was by Collins Mwemba, who was asking how to start a carbon business. So that was the first one. Then the second question, there was a Kefas study who was asking in terms of what is the minimum land size that one can use for carbon project development. So if you can handle those two, then we'll move to the raised hands. Thank you.
How to set up a carbon business? That's question that is of interest to a lot. I think depends what you mean by this. There are two sides. Either you have an activity that has potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, such as those that I have mentioned earlier, and in that case, you need to basically go through that certification process. So you formulate your activity. So I haven't not mentioned step one. Step one is something for someone who's usually not entirely sure of the viability of having their own activities certified, because that's a resource intensive process, so I think you've got to be sure that it's really worthwhile pursuing certifications before you do so. And that eligibility, I think that we will go through in the second part, is basically looking at, okay, what is the cost of implementing your activities? What is the potential for reducing greenhouse gas emissions? What is the potential revenue from selling carbon credits? And will this revenue enable you to maybe overcome the challenges that you are currently facing in scaling up your activities? But that would probably be really step one, is looking at trying to understand that potential. And once you've qualified that, start going through the certification process. So drafting the product documentation is basically how's the activity going to be working, where it's going to be implemented, what is going to be the scale of it over time, how it's going to be monitoring the impact of the program and this sort of thing. So I would say that would be the very first step. If what you mean by starting a carbon business means trying to generate carbon reduction units. Now, in other contexts, it can mean, how do I participate in a way or another as a private entity into the growing and nascent carbon market? Maybe as an intermediary, as a technical service provider, as and in that case, really, I think it's a very open questions and open question. I think building up knowledge, and I think what we've realized, that's the case in Zambia, but that's the case as well in many other contexts. There's obviously a lack of domestic technical knowledge, and so if you're able to build enough capacity to support local product developers, I think that's a way to find a market for getting into carbon finance. So let me know if I haven't replied to or addressed your questions. I think we can go deeper into that, but that's maybe a general answer here. And the second question around the size of the land, I think it depends very much on the nature of the activity. If we're talking about an existing parcel of existing forest that you want to replant. Let's say you've got a parcel and you want to plant trees and create a forest, and then I think you would still need a few thousand hectares. So that's very large, and I think I'll mention a bit later how SMEs could tap into this opportunity, because I'm very much aware that this not cap, but threshold, can represent a very already high target. If you're talking about agricultural activity or agroforestry, again, I think we're going to be talking about several thousand hectares. And then if you're talking about, I don't know, distributing improved cooking devices or distributing solar lanterns, and then we would be talking about probably, again, a few thousand devices, a few thousand households that would need to be targeted.
All right, thank you very much, Olivia. And also just to add that for anyone out there, like Network Mining as the participants who might be interested, both Hemacorp and Prospero are here like to help out in terms of providing assistance at various stages from the start up to the end. So we now move to the raised hands. We can start with Kefas. So Kefas, you can ask your question. After Kefas, we'll go to Japhet. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. A wonderful presentation there. I wanted just to get more information in relation with methane livestock carbon financing. What are you looking at in terms of maybe deliverables, in terms of size? Yeah, maybe just around that. I got interested when I saw on your presentation, I looked at methane to be one of the areas that can attract carbon financing. Maybe you could highlight more on that one. Thank you.
Could you just maybe specify the sector in which you would apply here? Because methane could be something to be considered in municipal waste. It could be also oil and gas extraction. It could be methane coming from a range of sources. What do you have in mind?
Yeah, well, what I have in mind is about fertilizer using methane.
Okay.
Using wastes from animals.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
yeah. Yeah.
So the use of chemical fertilizer is in a range of industry, including the tobacco industry that is fairly active in Zambia, a large source of greenhouse gas emissions, notably because of the way that the nitrates, the potassium, and others are extracted, imported, and used, and disposed in soil. And so here we'll be looking at the carbon footprints, the carbon emissions related to the use of chemical fertilizers versus, for instance, the promotion of the use of organic fertilizer. So we'll be looking at, the carbon impact of each of them, multiplied by obviously the quantity of fertilizers that you were able to, or not the quantity of carbon intensive or chemical fertilizers that you were able to displace through the promotion of organic fertilizers. For instance, and if you may be facing a range of challenges in scaling up the use of organic fertilizers, including logistical issues, including the lack of awareness around the efficiency of those fertilizers, or, and so you could potentially think of using carbon finance as a way to, subsidize the cost of manufacturing, distributing, promoting organic fertilizer. The challenge here is going to be demonstrating that you promoting organic fertilizer really displaces carbon intensive chemical fertilizer, and reaching a scale that is large enough that it enables your activities to trigger, I'd say, at least 5,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year. So I'm kind of aware that this might sound very abstract, this 5,000 tons of carbon dioxide, but you might want to keep that in mind. Just and then if you try to search for the carbon footprint of, you know, the fertilizer, the chemical fertilizer you might want to displace through your activities. Does that answer your question, or?
Thank you very much. I think you've highlighted something that I need actually to work on, where I need to actually get, I've read the aspect you raised for 5 tons, for example, annually. So I want then to find a way, how then is this calculated?
Yeah.
Can it be calculated in relation with what I'm doing? And
Yeah.
then, so yeah, I think that's where I may need clarity.
Yeah, so it's 5,000, and so there exists someone is Andrew is like drawing on the presentation. I don't know. Yeah, so just there exists, you know, out there, you know, the carbon quantification monitoring methodologies. There are about 300 of them, you know, to fit the various contexts, and this would give you a step-by-step approach to assessing this. Obviously, the challenge is, you know, maybe to find that that methodology. So we at AMOCOP, we have developed a small free resource called the Carbon Finance Handbook. If you Google it, you should be able to find it, the Carbon Finance Handbook that you can download for free. And this handbook provides you with the resources that you need to identify potentially the right carbon quantification methodology. And one of the steps, you know, identifying the right methodology and assessing emission reduction of your activities.
All right, thank you very much, Olivia. So I think, first you can still get in touch with both AMOCOP as well as Prospero for further interactions. So let's go to Japheth. Then from Japheth, we can go to Shepard and Kennedy. There was a hand, I think, which was raised by Shepard. So Japheth, Shepard, and Kennedy. Then after that, we'll read out the questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much for the wide elaboration there on today's topic. I just wanted to clarify one thing. I had a similar question with Kefas, but mine, I think I'm asking it on behalf of the community here. The community are much involved in they have started the program of generating organic fertilizer. Now, the challenge is that they are doing it at a very small scale. So they asked me, since I'm a person who interacts with people like you, on how they can get support because they want to expand. Secondly, the same community is involved in tree planting as a way of protecting the forest. They're also asking, because we have a challenge whereby when the trees are the trees they are planting, they grow up to a certain level, unscrupulous people are coming in and start cutting those trees. So we want, I think, to further the protection of our forest. I don't know how we can be helped in that line. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think I'll mention that in the second part of the presentation, and Moses has touched upon that. One of the reasons we are giving this presentation today is that we feel with Prospero there is not only an opportunity for a range of players in Zambia to use carbon finance, but a need really for that, you know, a building of awareness and capacity, and the need for technical support to organization like yours. And so Prospero is going to be launching like a pre-incubator for project activities that of the sort that you mentioned, and that are looking for supports to you know, to assess their activities and get them maybe through the certification process. One thing that you'd likely be requested to do, though, is to maybe put together a short document explaining, you know, what you just explained here, but in more details. You know, who would be involved, what is the current scale, what could be the, you know, the scale over time, who would be involved, and you know, what is the technical capacity of the various organizations involved, and so that's how we kind of intend to tackle it in the short term, is, you know, to have Prospero supporting number of, probably limited to start with, but of organizations that are able to implement activities that you know, could potentially here reduce forest degradation, as you've mentioned, and promote more sustainable agricultural practices.
Thank you very much.
So I think there will be a questionnaire at the end of the webinar. I think if you kind of submit your details and your interest, you know, I think that's probably the best way for us and Prospero to reach out to you afterwards.
Thank you very much for that information.
All right, thank you very much. So Kefas and Japheth, if you could just drop your hands. So let's go now to Richard. You can ask your question.
Hi, everybody. Oliver, and thanks for being with us. We are located in Lusaka, and we've started a organization called Forest One with the object of harvesting forest fruits on a sustainable basis and turning those into high quality products, but also making cook stoves. Now, as far as I know, we're the only company in Zambia making clean cook stoves, which we've done. We've made 5 samples of. They're very high quality, certainly the same quality as everything else on the market from Burn and various other people who are made in Kenya. So we've made these stoves and we've got to this point where we need certification. And I must say this process is unbelievably difficult. We've really come up against roadblocks that seem insurmountable. And that's, for us, we're quite a big organization with a number of companies, and we have resources. And this certification process is 2 years plus. We've written to 5 different companies at this point, and all of them have other things they're doing, or they're not interested, or so on. And I must say this, when you consider the importance of this subject and the importance of what we're trying to do, this 2 year plus certification process really is very onerous. And so with our cook stoves, I mean, there are other cook stoves on the market. One would think that this could be fast-tracked somehow, since they're exactly the same as other cook stoves made in other places in the world. And we so far have completely failed to make any progress in this, and perhaps you can advise us.
Yeah, I think, you know, those, you know, I know these slides, I think that you can still see here, give you an idea of the time frame for certifying a project activity that kind of is maybe on the conservative side to what you're mentioning here, and with a very much increased interest in the carbon markets over the past 12 to 18 months, that we've seen basically the number of submission for certifications through the most known certification standards, you know, skyrocketing, and certification standard not being able to cope with the need for them to review all the paperwork that is required. And so, you know, and obviously we're kind of very much aware that this is you know, very resource intensive process. We are seeing a number of innovation coming up. Is not, you know, mostly associated with the, you know, forestry sectors. We're seeing organizations that are basically trying to build a vertically integrated processes to set in place simpler rules, automatic forms to onboard project developers on their platforms and issue carbon assets for them to retail. This is still the beginning of that you know, process, I would say, and it's true that a lot of project developers are finding themselves challenged by not only the need to have access to dedicated technical resources, but also sometimes really just the challenge to access to this dedicated resource, because everyone is extremely busy on the market at the moment. There are not too many individuals, organizations that have the technical capacity to support product developers to go through the certification process. So what we are seeing, that's one of the things that AMOCOP does, support product developer through the certification process, but obviously, you still have that sort of, fairly long timeline that you have to face. And so some product developers find financial sponsors that are able to pay for the certification process and maybe even pay for some of the cost that you would incur in implementing your activities and deploying your technology. So we are seeing an increasing number of private, sector financial sponsors that are able to, pay for all these. So I'd say maybe that's one way around it. That's what one of the things that we've identified is with Prospero as a need in Zambia, to have one organization that is available domestically to support project developers when they are able to articulate a concept that can be deployed at scale. And so Prospero intends to provide the technical support with us at AMOCOP to support organizations like yours to go through the certification process, and then at some point in the near future, maybe even provide pre-financing to organizations like yours so that you can have access to funding before you are able to generate carbon assets. So we kind of, have identified those gaps. We are aware they're there. It's not something specific to Zambia, and that's something that we intend to tackle, at a small scale, I guess, to start with, but with Prospero in Zambia. So do I'd say, maybe do reach out to Moses and the organizer of the webinar. We're actually actively looking for organization that we can support in Zambia.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia, for that. So I think we can just read out 3 questions from the chat. Then thereafter, once you respond, then we can go back to Richard and Andrew and close for the first session. The other questions, I think, will be answered at the end of the second session. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Hey everyone, I was getting some feedback, sorry about that. Questions from the chat. I'll read this one from Given. This one says, is Olivia's firm available to be contracted for technical support in the certification process? The other one from Neva says, how can community groupings, cooperatives, and other SMEs access the carbon finance given this difficult certification process? And the last question I'm reading says, can an organization focusing on smallholder irrigation provision qualify for this certification, given that the irrigation helps in livelihood and sustainability programs in rural areas and conservation as a way of addressing tree cutting for charcoal and poaching? Did you get the questions, Olivia?
Olivia, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I was saying that I got the irrigation parts, but I didn't really quite get the link with tree cutting, so I can comment on potential for irrigation devices to be eligible to this financing mechanism. The first one was about consultant services. What was the second one? Was there a second one? Was there two of them? Hello? Okay, just gonna, I don't hear anything. Just gonna comments here on consultancy. So yeah, I mean that's the sort of services that we kind of specialize in. You know, we are a technical carbon finance climate change consulting firm. We're based out of London, so we don't necessarily have an office in Zambia, but we are working actively with a range of organizations in Zambia. We have a member of our team who's Zambian, yeah, we work across a range of locations, including Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, Togo, and a range of other countries on supporting project developers or organizations that may have activities that are eligible to go through certification. So we are available to provide this sort of services. But again, I think it could be also something that could qualify through Prospero as, you know, eligible to be receiving, I guess, you know, this sort of services subsidized or free through the pre-incubator that we're putting together. So do manifest your interest, you know, at the end of the webinar. And then the only other question was around irrigation equipments. Here again, and so I heard that the person mentioned that, you know, irrigation was providing a range of positive impacts. And so what's really important here is to ensure that your activities has the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You know, although it's never really in this context the priority, that's you know, the financing mechanism is based on the ability of the activity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So first, you've got to be able to demonstrate that this is going to happen through irrigation. So that would be the case, for instance, in the context where you are replacing, you know, solar power pump, for instance. You know, you're replacing, I guess, diesel generator or diesel generated and powered pumps by solar power pumps, and that you would see an emission reduction from the reduced use of fossil fuel combustion. And other contexts, this may be a little bit more challenging to demonstrate there are emission reductions, and that you would be able to really benefit from this financing mechanism. Now, remember the third question, I think, was around how cooperatives or small players could participate in that financing mechanism, considering the needs to get a certain scale. I'm gonna briefly run through that in the second part, but I think to me it's mostly going to be about, you know, finding other organizations with common interest and designing a program that can apply to you know, a fairly large scale, a region, a province, district, or even nationally, implementing a range of predefined activities that have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And you know, each activities could, you know, from a number of players could, you know, meeting a number of criteria could benefit from that program. So it's really going to be about, you know, finding common interest with other players in the market, even if they are your competitors. You know, and the provider of services or products that are offering similar services. They don't exactly need to be the same technology or practice, but you will need to find some commonality between your activities and your partners.
Thank you very much, Olivia. So if we can just quickly go to Andrew. And Richard, if you still have a question, because I can see your hand is still raised, then thereafter we'll break off just for 5 minutes and go into our second session. Then for those that might feel that their questions have not been answered for now, we will still respond at the end of the second session. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Am I clear?
Yes.
Okay, please. Yes, Kyamasengo Andrew. I'm based in Kasempa. I'm the founder of Vincent Green Environmental Foundation. I am one of those who did a pilot on the Forest Act 2015, which allows communities to form community forests. And when we were doing this in the past, that was 2015 to 2016, we had no component of carbon in it. Now, currently, we are trying to put a carbon component into this community forest. So we have got about 27 hectares of land. The other one is in Kasempa. Then we have got a little bit, although we want to extend it, at the source of Zambezi River. Now, what I wanted to find out from Prospero and my presenter here, we want to find an investor that who can come into us as a third party or a project developer, so that we go into carbon. So I don't know whether you have got any platform where we can put our ideas to see how we can begin to process this carbon project. Because I distributed some green cook stoves from Greenway cook stoves from India. Little did I know that from this I was doing a carbon project, but for our friends in India. So now we want to capture using a voluntary carbon markets in our community forest. So what advice can you give to us? What are the steps that we're supposed to do? Thank you.
So your community forest, can you just very briefly tell me what activities are being undertaken? Is it about the management of an existing existing forest plots, or a restoration of these plots?
Yes, looking at our forests in Northwest, and it's a combination of smaller trees and the big ones. So we were looking at the 3 types of projects. We wanted to do another project maybe should be, depending on the analysis that our you people can do. Others maybe can be forest management. The other one maybe can be even under RED, I'm sure. Okay. Maybe RED plus, yes. But for afforestation and the other thing, in Northwest, it's not very common because most of the trees are mixed in nature. Maybe between forest management and maybe RED plus project. These
okay. Yeah, thanks a lot, Andrew. Yeah, so I think one of the challenge here you might be facing is to find other community forest to partner with, because 27 hectares is, in light of the comments that I've made earlier, going to be making that process way too resource intensive. The amount of emission reductions, whatever the activity you're carrying out, really, forest protection, restorations, or improved land management or agricultural management, 27 hectares is definitely going to be way too small, which means basically that the emission reductions, if you sell whatever emission reduction you might get out of it, you'll sell out the market and you won't be able to even cover the process, the cost of certification.
It's 27,000 hectares. 27,000 hectares.
Okay. All right. So that's a totally different picture here. I think for I think in some context, even 27,000 hectares might be too small. It really depends on the nature of the activities. If you're talking about restoration, there's likely to be plenty enough. If you're talking about protection, it depends on the aggressiveness or aggressivity of the current threats of deforestation and degradation. But Yeah, I mean, obviously there was not as much interest back in 2015 and 16 as there is today, mostly driven by much higher prices that also make the process a lot more interesting and financially makes financial sense to implement activities to reduce emissions. I'd say, if you're able to formulate that in a concept note, again, I think same advice that I've given to someone else earlier, and to demonstrate the activities that you intend to implement. What will be the location? What will be the scale? We understand that you might not be able to provide numbers on the carbon impact this may have, but at this stage, I think that's something that you could submit without the carbon impact of your anticipated activities. But really sort of formulate a concept note as if you were requesting, I guess, funding from I don't know, private or public investors, and you can contact and submit that to Prospero. And if we think that there is a potential, then we'll be shortlisting you, and then we'll be sort of working with you to refine to try to start by quantifying the potential carbon impact of these activities at that scale.
All right, thank you very much. So let's quickly, Richard, your hand is still up, so I don't know whether you've got a follow-up question. Quickly ask so that we can break for 5 minutes and go into the second session. Then all the other questions will be handled at the end.
Okay. Thank you very much. Oliver, we talk there's two things we're talking about here. One is the size of forest in hectares, and the other is the amount of tons of carbon produced and so on, and the offsets. So in Zambia, if you take a typical Zambian forest landscape, what does 1 hectare of forest produce in terms of carbon offset? I mean, is it 5 tons? Is it 1 ton? Is it 100 tons? Can we have some sort of guiding idea of how much 1 hectare actually is worth as an offset? Thank you.
What are you talking about here? Are you talking about reforestation? Are you talking about existing forest carbon stocks and avoiding those to be degraded and deforested? Because obviously the answer will vary from one activity to another. For if you're doing if you have bare lands and you're reforesting, you could expect, I think, obviously going to be smaller at the beginning and larger at the end, but between sort of 5 and 25 ton of carbon dioxide per hectare per year on average across over a period of 20 to 30 years, depending on the species that you're planting. So that's where new forest creation, for instance, or reforestations of degraded land. Depending on the species, that's the sort of carbon savings that you might, carbon sequestration rate that you might get. 5 to 25. I'm giving you a very broad range. It's more likely to be between sort of 10 and 15 ton of carbon dioxide sequestered per year and per hectare over a 20 to 30 years period of time. If you are talking about an existing forest, we're talking about in Zambia, it's mostly Miombo woodlands, and I don't have the figures on the top of my head, but I think it's about on average, probably between 200 and 400 ton of carbon dioxide currently stored per hectare of forest. And if you want to get a number in terms of saving of carbons, then you need to factor in the trend of deforestation. Are you going to be avoiding 5% year-on-year deforestations? Are you going to be avoiding a 1%, a 10% deforestation or degradation year-on-year? So obviously, if it's 10%, then you will get 10% maybe of that, 200 to 400 ton of carbon dioxide per year as carbon avoided, thanks to the implementation of your activities, and you'll be in the same type of range of between to 20 and 40 ton of carbon dioxide avoided per hectare per year. It's often 10% is extremely aggressive. You know, there may be plots of land that are undergoing this sort of aggressive deforestation and degradation, but that's not really the common practice. I don't know what is the rate of deforestation in Zambia across the country, but we are currently working in locations where we are tackling deforestation rate of between 1% and 3% a year. And so I think we're anticipating to reduce or avoid around 2 to 3 ton of carbon dioxide per year per hectare, you know, by providing well, those people that are responsible for deforestation with maybe alternative livelihoods. Activities are not necessarily as costly as, you know, planting a new forest, and the carbon yield might not be as large, but it's all, that's the sort of activities that is usually over taken over a larger amount of land, larger area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, we've been trying to find that information, and so far we haven't been able to find anything even remotely helpful. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
We have 2 things that you could look into. Again, I've mentioned before, our carbon finance handbook, freely accessible on our website. I think we've given a little bit of a benchmark on that, notably on reforestation. And I think, you know, the reforestation is more homogeneous across countries and landscapes as you know, compared to deforestation or existing forest. But for existing forest, we have also recently published a blog post article, which you can find on our website, that compares all those forest protection projects that we could find, or most of them at least, and this compared their performance. So that will give you a more granular view of what's out there and what project developers are getting per. I think we have some comparison per hectare. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Olivia. Jean, we'll give you an opportunity right at the end of the second session. So just hold on to that thought, then you ask your question. So for now, let's just take a very quick break for 5 minutes. Then we can go into the second session. So my time now is showing 10:37 a.m. So we can resume at exactly 10:42 a.m. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. We're now going into the second session for today. So this one, I think, is much shorter, to last approximately 30 minutes. And thereafter, we'll continue with the questions and comments. Thank you very much. Olivia, you can start with the presentation.
Yes, thanks a lot, Moses. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see the presentation.
Wonderful. Okay, I close that and I'm just gonna get started really. All right, so giving a little bit more maybe insight into the Zambian context, and also trying to provide an angle for SMEs, considering that's one of Prospero's mission to really support the private sector and SMEs in Zambia. Here's, I know we already started touching upon this, but here's a slightly more detailed list of activities which we have identified as relevant in the context of Zambia, notably across 3 sectors that are today identified as being the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. In the forestry and land use sector, forest conservation, we've mentioned that, forest regeneration, so it could be reforestation, it could be assisted natural regeneration as well, tree planting for a range of activities, including timber, including fruits bearing trees, agroforestry, as an activity that is definitely going to be eligible to benefit from carbon funds, promotion of fertilizers with high nutrient efficiency. We've touched upon that. It's not necessarily the easiest in terms of carbon quantification and monitoring, but that's something that has potential to trigger positive carbon impacts that can be measured. And then conservation and agroecology. So, agroecology, conservation, agriculture, crop diversifications that enables often more carbon to be stored in soil, but also the intensification of agriculture to avoid conversion of, forest lands, notably. The energy sector, by far the measures that will trigger the greatest emission reductions are the reductions of the use of firewood and charcoal by domestic use of firewood and charcoal, mostly for cooking, so notably through the use of distribution of efficient cooking devices. Production of low carbon electricity, depending on the context, mostly the case when replacing carbon intensive electricity, such as the use of diesel generators at the level of a factory, at the level of a group of household, and energy efficiency measures possibly, again, on a larger scale, I guess. So mostly looking at, maybe manufacturing facilities, improve the energy efficiency for boilers, for instance. Manufacturing of solid fuel, here notably referring to the manufacturing of charcoal that is today in Zambia, but not exclusively, also in the neighborhood countries, a process that is that has a very low energy efficiency. And potentially an issue with scale here, but energy efficiency measures and energy consumptions in the mining industry. Waste management as well, to a smaller extent, but still, treatments of wastewaters, treatment of solid waste, solid municipal waste, capture of the gas, use of the gas, from the waste decaying to generate power, potentially domestic waste recycling, but it can be notably the case of animal waste reusing or recycling to generate biogas that can be used for cooking notably. Here's, you know, I'm gonna run through that quickly. I think by now you've probably got an idea of how this works, but just, you know, give you an idea of one of the areas that we've looked at in Zambia. It's a national park covered by Miombo Forest, and where the local community, although they are not allowed to be using the resources of the park, encroaches into the park and the buffer areas, as they are highly dependent on natural resources. So we see poaching, encroachments, deforestation due to charcoal production, farming activities, and that has been causing a steady trend of deforestation in and mostly out of the national park. So here, this park is currently looking at the possibility to use carbon finance to implement activities that will have, you know, result into the production of deforestation, including the support to sustainable agricultural practices such as agroforestry, sustainable rice production, beekeeping, as well as enabling to securize land tenure to enable household farmers and to invest into their own land and avoid expansion. That's a project that is roughly covering 100,000 hectares, and that we think could avoid every year 200,000 tons of carbon dioxide to be going into the atmosphere. If you do the math at a price of $5 to $10 per unit, but today, if you have a carbon unit from such a project, you can potentially sell it for you know, $10 to $15, and that would give you a revenue of, you know, $1 to $2 million per year that you need to use to cover obviously the monitoring of the carbon impact, but that you can obviously that you should be using to implement and finance all these you know, activities that I've mentioned here, and obviously those activities are often undertaken by independent ventures, but nothing prevents a small to medium private organizations to, you know, support the project's implementation by distributing energy efficient devices, by promoting best practice when it comes to forestry management and agriculture. And so there's definitely a role for the private sector in implementing activities that will have a positive impact on the forest cover. That's another example here, maybe less common or less applicable to those of you who are attending the webinar today. There is in Zambia potential to use geothermal power to generate electricity, and we've worked with an organization that has the potential to develop a 10 megawatt power plant. It's already kind of large, not necessarily in the world of geothermal power, but in terms of, you know, capital intensiveness. And you know, and the production of this electricity, which would be clean, renewable, and sustainable, would avoid basically more carbon intensive electricity to be produced, and we've calculated that this could potentially avoid about 50,000 tons of carbon dioxide every year to be going into the atmosphere from the combustion of fossil fuel. Again, sold at, you know, $4 to $10 per unit, that gives a budget of $3 to $7 million of extra revenue over, let's say, here a 14 years period of time. One of the things that I have not mentioned before, but that is extremely important and that at the center of this financial mechanism, is that it's not because you have an activity that reduces greenhouse gas emissions that you can you know, get your product certified and sell carbon credits. You need to be able to demonstrate that your activities is not going to happen without the expected or extra revenue of carbon finance. So this is a concept called additionality. You need to be able to demonstrate that this additional revenue stream and sometimes the only revenue stream, will enable you to implement these activities and will have as a direct consequence the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So here in that context, for instance, if that power plant is financially viable on its own, and financially viable enough to, or financially attractive enough to attract investors, then this power plant is unlikely, although it would reduce greenhouse gas emissions, unlikely to be able to demonstrate that it's facing so many challenges and barriers that it needs that extra source of revenue. In that case, that project might not be eligible to this financial mechanism. And here, this is what I've just mentioned here. This is the distribution of biogas digesters at the level of individual farms for household and farmers that have a few heads of cattle and producing enough waste to generate biogas that will be used for cooking, to replace the use of firewood, to replace the use of charcoal. A program, for instance, and here again, I think there's quite a lot of opportunities for the private sectors who, is involved in brick making, was involved into manufacturing, maybe distributing some of these technologies, notably the cooking devices, the tabletop cookers, gas cookers. So we've calculated that a program that would enable the implementation of 10,000 biogas units could reduce about 46,000 tons of carbon dioxide every year for pretty much the duration of the lifetime of the biogas units, which would be between 10 and 15 years. And this would bring an extra revenue stream of $230,000 to $460,000 every year, which could be used to subsidize the cost of those biogas units for more households to be adopting them. There are a range of challenges that some of you already pointed out, in Zambia, but again, that's not something that is extremely specific to Zambia. We've come across that in many of the neighborhoods countries, and kind of structural gaps, I guess. One of them is the lack of capacity and knowledge in relation to the carbon markets, in relation to the process for certifying project activities and selling credits. That's the case both in the private sector as well as with institutional actors. And that's what we're trying to do here with this webinar, is progressively trying to build that capacity. Quantifying emission reduction requires most of the time data, sometimes national level data, regional level data that can sometimes not be accessible, and that can be a challenge to have access to this data and to have data to use to demonstrate the potential of an activity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Here, I think in reference to how SMEs or smaller players could tap into this financial mechanism, I think there's also a lack of cooperation, and alliances and network for smaller players to be talking to each other. A small player with common interests to be talking to each other and supporting each other to put together programs that could be eligible to use this financial mechanism. Certifying a project comes at a cost. Initiating and funding activities at a large scale also come at a cost. And so there's often, we found that obviously there's a lack of, financial capacity. And that's also something that, we together with Prospero are looking at sort of tackling, and how an organization like Prospero could be not only putting, money on the table, but also enabling external players to feel confidence to do the same things in co-financing arrangements. Obviously, Zambia is a country with a fairly low population density. which can be a challenge when it comes to the cost of implementing a range of measures. We have a lot of forest-dependent communities, which also can be a challenge when structuring project because of the sensitivity of working in sort of forested areas. And then obviously there are issues and risk related to the structure of the economy, the currency risk, the funding of infrastructure. But that's something again that is not specific to Zambia, and that will be that's something that you will likely all be familiar with and are able to kind of navigate around or through. Today, although the government of Zambia has manifested their interest in tapping into climate finance more broadly, but also more specifically the carbon finance. The difference between carbon and climate finance is that carbon finance is mostly focusing on avoiding greenhouse gas emissions, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and using carbon as a unit to finance activities, and climate finance is a much broader source of or financing mechanism that could use grants, loans, equity, that is not necessarily focusing on emission reductions, but on a range of impacts and that can contribute to either climate change mitigation or climate change adaptation. And so obviously we've noticed a lack of institutional leadership and support to notably the private sector, to use this financing mechanism. And my view, my experience is that although it's a fairly complex financing mechanism, that's also a mechanism that has been heavily used by the private sector because it does not always require complex financial structuring and by foreign organizations. The country don't necessarily know when carbon credits can be treated as an environmental commodity and exchanged and sold as a product, which could require a less sophisticated sort of financial financing of foreign financial arrangements. So obviously everyone is together in Egypt at the moment discussing how they could sort of apply some of this financing mechanism into their own institutional context and framework. Those are some of the recommendations that we've come up with and that we are with Prospero trying step by step to implement in Zambia, specifically to enable more and more organizations like yours to benefit from carbon finance. We think that building a centralized and easy to access carbon project experience sharing platform could support knowledge sharing and awareness raising around this financing mechanism that does not exist today. I think there's a need to boost public and private initiatives. So we're having this webinar with you today, but we also intend to engage with public institutions around the enabling environments to enable more of you to more easily benefit from carbon finance. We need to improve knowledge sharing and cooperation between public and private sectors. We've mentioned that. Build local technical capacity, to support the certification of programs through trainings and courses. So that's mostly it. The role of SMEs in the carbon market. Obviously, as you've understood by now, one of the challenge or difficulty of that mechanism is that it comes at a fairly significant cost, and this means that programs and activities needs to have a scale that is large enough to really justify the resources that goes into certifying programs. So here again, looking at forestry, land use, energy, waste management sectors that are partly relevant in Zambia. We think that SMEs could, take action as part of business coalition and advocacy groups. find common interest and build together programs that could benefit from this financial mechanism at the regional, national level. Identify sectors with the greatest mitigation potential. Here again, some of you might not be active in this field, but this is where we have the greatest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and because this mechanism is about funding activities based on their carbon impacts, we need to look at focusing on those sectors really are the major sources of greenhouse gas emission in Zambia. Identifying the challenges, the barriers that you are facing as an organization to scale up measures, including services and goods that have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Is it funding? Is it awareness? Is it logistics? What are the challenges that you're facing? What will be the solutions, and what potential impact it would have in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? Qualifying the scale of opportunities and to promote climate mitigation technologies or practice. And again, I guess in light of the support that Prospero is going to start providing, structuring concept notes to demonstrate how, subsidies here, that's what really carbon finance is, selling carbon credits to get funding to enable to scale up activities that would not have been scaled up without this, carbon finance. So identifying, how subsidies may be able to promote low carbon practices and technology to scale up more rapidly at the national or again regional level in Zambia. Those are three examples of initiatives that have been out there that is benefiting from some degree of carbon finance, not necessarily through the very conventional channels that I have mentioned, but that's an interesting one. So Rabobank, the Dutch bank, has got they have come up with their own certification schemes that it's much simpler, like a simplified methodology for agroforestry initiatives to benefit from carbon finance. They are in charge of connecting large corporates with farmers when they're able to improve their business model and transforming mono-farming culture into future-proof agriculture. Again, they don't require activities to be certified to those big certification schemes that I've mentioned. They've developed their own protocol to quantifying carbon and qualifying farmers. So that's something that may be of interest to some of you. This one here is an example, not in Zambia, but in South Africa, of an independent organization called Credible Carbon have come up with, again, their own protocol methodology for delivering carbon credits to organizations that are in South Africa and that are implementing a micro-scale community-based and development-oriented project in a range of sectors. So, again, they have noticed the same challenge around the resource intensiveness of the certification process, and they wanted to come up with a registry and rules that were a bit simpler. That's a standard that is recognized in South Africa, but obviously the issues of using something that is less well known, maybe less robust, is that it can be challenged to attract international buyers of carbon credits who would not necessarily know of the certification standards. And the last example is an organization some of you may know. It's an organization called We Forest, based in Belgium, and they have activities in Zambia, and they aim to restore native Miombo woodlots on small holdings and promote sustainable exploitation of Miombo woodlands and sustainable forest management. And they, I think, intend to register a program that will be able to onboard, small land holders into getting carbon credits for changing the forest management of their woodland. So those are the 5 steps that you'll find in the ebook that I have mentioned, and how to qualify an activity to carbon funds, to find out whether your activity is can generate carbon credits and can benefit from the revenue. Demonstrate, are you going to be able to demonstrate that without the revenue of carbon finance and the carbon revenue, your activity would take place, at least at the scale that you intend to implement your activities at? Does it really require carbon funds to scale up and reduce emissions? Are you able to demonstrate that? If you are able to demonstrate that, then you can go to the next step, which is your activity going to be reducing enough? Well, I guess first is there an existing carbon accounting methodology out there to quantify the carbon impact of my activities? And if yes, are there any certification standards out there that is willing to generate carbon credits for the type of activities I want to implement? In most cases, the answer is yes. We're talking about forestry, agriculture, energy. As I mentioned, there are about 300 carbon accounting methodology out there. So it's very likely that there will be one that you can use for your specific, activity. And then you need to kind of try to work out, how much your activity would generate in terms of carbon reduced or sequestered, and understand if you were selling those as carbon credits, would that provide you with enough revenue that you'd be able to pay for the certification of the activity, as well as to use that proceeds to finance part of your activities or subsidize, for example, the product that you're selling. And are there any potential barriers, that would prevent you from implementing that project? Are there any non-financial motivations, as in, what would be the other benefits of implementing your activities? Is always a useful thing to identify, as some of the certification standards would require product to be able to demonstrate that they have a positive impact beyond carbon. I think we're getting to the end here. It's just a very quick pictures of who's out there in Zambia today. And one of the things that you could see is that a lot of these organizations, they have been supported by international. Some of them are local product developers. Some of them are international product developers, but a lot of them have been getting support from international technical consultants to get their more support against to get their activities certified. And so what I wanted to get to is basically, as I've mentioned before, we have identified a number of roles that Prospero could take to enable a number of you to better benefit from this financial mechanism. One of them is trying to develop initiatives that are capable of attracting financial support from external investors, and so supporting initiatives to develop concept notes, and providing technical support really to build and articulate concept notes that would make sense in the context of carbon finance. And that would attract potential buyers of carbon offsets. The second one is building knowledge and capacity on the carbon markets, and so that's what we're doing. We started doing these webinars. There would also be an in-person workshop, and again, we intend to shortlist a number of activities and concepts to provide supports to, with the intentions of getting those through the certification pipeline and identifying buyers for their carbon assets. And yeah, supporting those activities to be monitored and to develop in line with the requirement of the certification standards. What added value can Prospero bring? Again, supporting product activities from throughout the carbon product cycle, from initial eligibility study, which I've mentioned before, the various steps to qualify potential activity, to the monitoring and issuance of carbon assets for activities that go beyond the initial eligibility study and into the certification process. Keeping track of development in the carbon market and best practice to follow, and provide that sort of technical and intelligence sort of advisory to the private sector and SMEs in Zambia, and ensuring that we build the capacity of local implementation partners, as well as local technical consultants that could support the domestic ecosystem. And we've reached the end of part 2, and obviously very happy to take any sort of questions that may have missed a number of things. I went quite quickly on some of them, so let's go with the questions.
Thank you very much, Olivia, for the second session presentation. So Jean had raised her hand, I think, early on, so I'd like to give her an opportunity to ask a question. Then thereafter, we'll go to the ones which are written in the chat. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes,
can you
Jean?
get me?
Yes.
Hi,
Absolutely.
you can get me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. My question is on the project that we have here in Mongo Western Province. We are looking at production of charcoal briquettes as a way of providing an alternative source of energy for cooking, as we are all aware that as Zambians, most of us, we use charcoal because most of the people cannot afford electricity or stoves. So most of ordinary Zambians use charcoal. So we thought of producing charcoal, but without cutting the tree. And we are going to use agricultural wastes, like rice husks, rice grass, and other agricultural wastes. So, so far we've managed to procure an equipment, a production line for our production of charcoal briquettes as a way of mitigation of deforestation and climate change in our country. And I just wanted to know whether such a project is eligible for funding under your organizations, because like right now, we've had a challenge. First, it was shipping costs that went high, but we managed to fight, and we've managed to bring the equipment up to Dar es Salaam. The equipment arrived on the 19th of October. But we don't have really resources, because I think the topping up on the shipping costs consumed our coffers, and we need to transport it to Mongo, where the production is going to take place. And we also need to buy raw materials, because we are looking at promoting the local farmers as a way of empowering them financially, and also food security in their homes. And we are also looking at engaging the charcoal burners, because we can't look at deforestation or charcoal burning without engagement of the perpetrators, who are the charcoal burners. So we are thinking of bringing them on board, work with them, encourage them to grow the crops from which we are going to buy the raw materials. But we don't have the resources, but we are ready to start our project. And we also managed to build a warehouse We are just remaining with the floor, the doors, and just finishing up. And we're hoping by December or maybe early January, we could start the production. But in the meantime, we have these challenges. So I don't know whether such a project is eligible for funding under your organization. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gina. In theory, yes, it is. I guess it's going to be, there may be going to be two questions here. The first one is going to be the scale. There's always a question of scale. What is the scale of your, or what is the potential scale of your activities in terms of displacing traditional charcoal consumption? So that's something that we would need to look into to qualify whether the size of the activities is really worth pursuing. And the second thing is possibly, again, in light of that, needs to qualify the requirement for actual funding, I think, is being able to demonstrate that you actually need this additional funding, considering you already bought this plant, although you haven't, I understand, managed to make it all the way to Zambia. But and then you might actually need, if it works well, to reinvest into additional facilities. But yeah, in theory, that could work. I think, again, that's something that we need to qualify by looking at the size of the operations, I guess, that you intend to have.
Yeah, the capacity of our equipment is 3 tons per hour, meaning
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know how many tons we can produce in a month, because the good part is we have available raw materials in our province, and they are available, whereby some we don't even have to buy. Yes, some we have to buy because we have to get the crops. So on the volumes, with the equipment that we have, I think we are able to do much. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not like, that's really the type of activities that could be eligible, huh? And at 3,000 tons, was that 3 tons? I think you said an hour, sounds like, probably a fair amount of charcoal to be displaced over a year or so. So yeah, it's potentially the sort of activity benefit from carbon finance. Would really, I think the first thing I would do is really try to calculate the amount of charcoal that you're able to produce, and how much traditional charcoal is going to be displaced as a result of that, and based on that, it give an idea of what is the potential of reducing emissions, and using that as a real game changer in terms of financial performance. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. Maybe just to highlight one thing, our equipment is made in a way whereby it has a carbonization furnace as a part of the components, and this allows us to protect the environment. Instead of polluting the environment, we are going to protect the environment. And so we are looking, it starts from the ground, as we are going to clean the environment. Whatever people throw away, the waste material, we go and pick. Like you come in Western Province, you find that the rice husks are thrown on the road or are just heaped, and there's no one to collect. So we go to the millers' premises, get that rice husks, and take to our plant and produce the charcoal. So in the first place, we are cleaning the environment, and at the end, we produce that product that doesn't affect our environment at all, but instead the motivation of this project is to protect nature, to protect our environment. And so anyway, that's that. Thank you so much.
Gina, I really encourage you to try to get in touch with Prospero after the call or fill out the forms, I think, that you'll be offered to fill out and provide us with a bit more information and to the size of your operations, the locations, and all these sort of things.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We can now go to Matthews.
Thank you very much, and a wonderful presentation. I think for me, just a concern that having this online meeting or maybe a workshop to call it, it's not enough. I think there's a lot of information that Olivia has offloaded, of which if one was to start following just from this, it may not be enough to come up with a very good proposal. You agree with me that carbon markets, if you look at the statistics, only foreigners are the ones that are implementing these carbon market projects. Why, as local, not even one, or we can say we are implementing without knowing that the project that we are running, actually it's under carbon market or credit. So if Prospero can consider to have a physical, maybe a 2-day workshop for me, maybe that can help, or even just a full-day workshop for all those that are participating online. I think we can get enough information and able to at least to try and to come up with a good project proposal and to follow all the steps so that we can be have access to carbon finance project. I submit. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matthew. You know, we agree that the webinar is not going to be enough. It's really just the very beginning of what we're trying to do here. There will be one-day in-person workshop, but we can't invite, you know, for instance, 400 or 500 people that have participated to the webinar. And so we're going to be using notably the questionnaires that we will be submitting at the end to qualify organizations that may have the greatest potential to formulate a concept note that could be then further supported. That's one thing. The second thing is that I wouldn't really say that it's that the carbon market in Zambia has mostly been illegal or benefiting the international organization. I'd say most products implemented in Zambia are implemented by Zambian organization, but this Zambian organization have managed to identify.
Hi everyone, can we just mute our microphones?
Yeah. So just so you know, I think those organizations that today are tapping into the carbon market in Zambia, they have involved some foreign entities, but they're Zambian organizations who are implementing the project on the ground. So I think those also potentially hold some good knowledge sharing potential, but it's really just about more, you know, the technical capacity that they've managed to identify and to get, you know, where it was.
Thanks, Olivia. So I think just to comment on Matthew's submission, I think it's very valid. So this is why we're saying that this is just the start of the process, and over the next few days, we'll be having a physical workshop, and we invite a number of participants, including yourself, so that you can interact more during that period. Thank you very much. So Collins, you can ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, Olivia. Actually, my submission is the same things that that you have answered, where we need to have some physical meetings. And of course, I wanted to find out something if that presentation can be sent to our email so that we can go through at our own time, because you know, certain networks that we are using, we are not allowing us to follow through well. So it is just a request that you help us with the presentation.
Maybe one for you, Moses.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olivia. So by the end of the day, you receive the presentation. It's ready. So we'll just send it to you once we are done. And most likely you also receive the recording of this webinar. Thank you very much. Let me just allow Yvonne to ask, or rather read out the questions in the chat. There were a number of questions that which were not read out after the first session. So Yvonne, go ahead.
Thank you, Moses. So I'll pick on the questions from where I ended. This is Rose. She's saying, good morning. If farmers were to plant trees, do you have specific trees, and where do we get seed for the same trees? This one is from Angela. She's asking about the land size. I bet it's about how much land do you need to have? And then Rose again is saying, are you going to share the presentation? I think Moses said something about that. Yes, we are going to share the presentation and the recording to your emails. How is the process of getting certification? How can individual farmers who are doing great to protect forests start to get benefit? Explain about registered SMEs that can take up this opportunity. And then this one is from Rogers. He's saying, why is it difficult getting feedback from Prospero on our form earlier project requests? This one, Rogers, I think you have to send us an email and explain what exactly you're talking about. Then we can assist from there. And then Frank is saying, we have an organization which is working with rural cooperatives and individual farmers in tree planting, forest management, and conservation. Is there a way we can get aid or benefit from this carbon finance? And then Subilo is saying, does Prospero offer funding to startups that under sustainable development that are in their proof of concept stage? And lastly, how about NTFPs? Please explain more on the benefits in terms of carbon financing. This should be non-timber or forest products. Yeah, thank you. That is all from the chat.
Yeah, could you repeat the first two? One of the things is one about tree planting and seedlings, and then I think there was one or two that I didn't quite get. Yeah, the second and third one maybe that you've taken here, or maybe I should look at the chat here. It's quite a lot of them. Well, I'm just gonna start answering those that I got, you know. So yeah, as I've mentioned, in theory, activities that involve tree planting at a scale that is large enough.
You needed the questions to be read out once more.
I think I think I will try to reply. I've got a few things here, and I think I may have missed the second and the third one, which didn't come up very clear to me. But I'll start answering, and I think, you know, we can, if you think that I have missed something, then maybe we can go back to this. So yeah, so I was saying, you know, tree planting, you know, either for reforestation, afforestations, restoration of degraded land, agroforestry are in theory going to be sequestering carbon. And so if it's implemented at a scale that is large enough, then you will be able to potentially use carbon finance to funds part of all of your activities. Now, I think there was a questions about where to get the seedlings, or that's definitely not a question for us. I think that's something that you need to see on the market. I'm not a specialist of the tree growing market in Zambia, yeah. So tree planting activities definitely going to be eligible if they're implemented at a scale that is large enough. I think there was a question on whether there's an example of SMEs that are registered already to benefit from carbon finance. I think, I don't know, I think we have to look at this in the perspective not of organizations, but of activities. I think there's a gentleman who mentioned earlier deploying improved cooking technologies. What would be, in that context, what would be certified is the program that goes and distributes the cooking efficient cook stove efficient cook stove. That would not be the SMEs who would be registered as I don't know, as a carbon entity really. So you're pitching, it's like if you're pitching for project really here. You're saying we're an organization, we intend to make this practice more common or to make this product more common. We are facing a range of challenges and scaling up our practices and activities. And if we were able to benefit from carbon finance, then we'd be able to scale up our activities. And that's the program or project activity that we intend to put in place and implement. Now, yeah, there's a range of things, I don't know, specifically in Zambia, but of small organizations that have gone into, getting financial support and articulated a large-scale program for distributing energy-efficient technologies. So maybe in Zambia, I don't have any on top of my head. Maybe Moses can help, but if not, it's something that we could look into. Yeah, why not? But obviously, when we're talking about SMEs here, we're not going to be talking about micro scale organizations, because you need to have the capacity to scale up your activities to a certain extent all the same. So SMEs can mean a lot of different things, but you're going to have to have past that, I guess, maybe startup phase and have at least 10, 20 employees, I guess, most of the time, to be able to really qualify for not to qualify really, it's not a criteria, but to be large enough to really be able to implement activities at a scale that enables you to reduce enough emissions that it can qualify for carbon finance. I think there's questions on, again, tree planting and land management and where to get supports. If you have the resources, you could contact technical consultants like Hamcop, but it's can be a challenge. We're aware for a lot of domestic organizations, and so instead, as I've mentioned, Prospero might need to provide you with support. Simply, you need to be able to articulate a concept, on a couple of pages to demonstrate what we are talking about. What is the practice? What is the technology? What are the challenges? What is the ventures? How, what is your plan? What is the impact going to be? So you need to really be able to articulate in a fairly good way. You don't need to know everything worked out, but you need to know what you want to do and to be able to articulate it in a way that it makes sense to external stakeholders. I'd say that's the first step, and then I think Prospero might be a good entry door to share this with. Does Prospero offer funding to start up for sustainable development, especially for activities that are at proof of concept? I would say it's quite unlikely. Again, sustainable development is an extremely broad concept, so here we are focusing on activities that have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emission. We've had that in the past in other countries where people come up with ideas around sustainable fashion and recycling, small scale recycling to, I don't know, do apparels or other things, and most of the time the answer is no. We're not going to be able to demonstrate there is enough carbon impact in this sort of activity, especially at startup phase, to make sense of carbon finance. And again, here we're not talking about funding for startups. We're talking about funding for scaling up activities that have the potential to the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the answer is likely to be no here, but again, depends on product and the stage of maturity. And then I think the last one was NTFP. I just probably don't have enough information here to really sort of qualify the questions and be able to formulate an answer. Yeah, so maybe you can go for another round of questions. How about NTFP? Please explain more on the benefits in carbon financing. Yeah, so I think Chrissy, if you can, formulate further your questions, that would be helpful.
All right, thank you very much, Olivia. So I can see there's also a comment by Kefas, which says, from what he has observed, like projects are long-term and planning has to be in that line. So I agree with that statement. Then there's also where he says, for the small-scale business owners, it seems there's no room for you and me for these programs. Unless we join hands, that way maybe we can manage to get carbon financing. So basically, I think it's more about, you can be an SME, but it depends more on the activities which you are doing on the ground and how easily they can be scaled up. So Prospero and Demacorp are here to assist both SMEs and organizations who are in the carbon space. Unless you have got something more to add, Olivia, thank you.
No, yeah, I think you've mentioned the essential here, but maybe you should have mentioned that carbon, once you've gone through that certification process, you could potentially benefit from carbon finance for 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. So it's not a quick, short gain. It's a long. It's adapted for those organizations who have long-term vision and plan to scale up and implement activities that have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Yeah. So the beginning is a bit painful, but again, the benefits can be triggered over a fairly large amount of time.
All right. Thank you very much, Olivia. So there's another question. I think he has retyped the question, Chrissy, where it says NTFP, the non-timber forest products in relation to carbon financing. So I'll just like maybe just to make a few assumptions here. I think what he's trying to say is that they're into non-timber forest products, which basically simply means that they are obviously implementing it in a more sustainable way, where they go into these forests, get these different non-timber forest products, and obviously sell them to off-takers. But in the process of doing this, they're also contributing towards the protection of forests. So I think the best approach for this, I think, would be the potential development of a RED+ project, which basically is looking at protection of forests. Thank you very much.
Moses, yeah, no, do you expect me to comment further, Moses, or I think you've...
No, it's fine. I just wanted to make a comment. If you have got anything more to add, you can.
Yeah, and I think that I understand. Yeah, I think there's, usually the forest conservation projects are able to reduce deforestation and forest degradation by providing alternative livelihoods to, local or forest-dependent communities. And so this is often done through the promotion of, harvesting of non-timber forest products. So that's, that's the sort of activities that can be promoted to really enable, shift livelihood for forest-dependent communities.
So thank you very much, Olivia. So I can't see any more questions in the chat. Then the there are no more raised hands. So at this point in time, I would like to thank everyone that participated in this webinar, and also just to mention that over the next few days, you will receive invites to the physical one, which will be held very, very soon. Then do not forget, immediately you leave the meeting, there will be a survey which will pop up. So kindly complete it. That's one which we are going to use in terms of selecting potential partners or participants for the upcoming physical webinar. So with those few words from my end, would like to close this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience and time. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.